Hello and welcome to Unit 4, Section 1. As previously mentioned, this unit is about legislation. So like any business, you need to be able to abide by the rules. Although it may seem a little dull, it is really important to understand, don't you think?
Oh, it certainly is. It will help to keep you legal, which will protect you in many ways, especially from court appearances. And it will also help to keep a level of safety and standards within your work.
Okay, so what are the main legislations that you think we ought to be aware of?
So the three key ones that we have to think about first. So that's the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, Manual Handling Operation Regulation 1992, and the Health and Safety First Aid Regulation in 1981.
And okay, so what do these actually mean?
Okay, so let's start with health and safety at work. So this one is, you'll see it all over the place, the big posters, with some basic information. So this is partly an employer's responsibility to do certain things, but also as an employee you have responsibilities as well.
Okay, so if I'm running a clinic, theoretically, what about me as the employer? What is my responsibility then?
Okay, so you're going to have to do things like carry out risk assessments, identifying any hazards and the protocols put in place, and also giving those hazards a risk level from low to high.
Okay.
Working with employees to protect everyone from harm. So this is ensuring that people don't go to places they're not supposed to go, and if there's things like fires and stuff, that everybody's looked after.
Okay.
Providing necessary training, so if you're using specialist equipment, you might need to be trained in a specific way, and also providing you with the appropriate PPE. So that's your protective personal equipment. Other things are things like providing appropriate toilets, washing facilities, drinking water, and obviously adequate to first aid, so your well-being. Also responsible for reporting injuries and disease and having the right insurance.
Okay, so the employer's got quite a lot of responsibilities really in terms of maintaining this piece of legislation. But you mentioned the employee. What about them? How are they going to be responsible in this setup?
Okay, so you can't blame everything on the employer if you don't follow what you've been told to do. So if you don't follow your training and the risk assessments you've been given, the responsibility then falls on you if you have an accident.
Okay.
So you have to be responsible for yourself and the people around you as well. So you have to take care to protect yourself and your clients. You need to cooperate with the employer over the health and safety protocols put in place. You can't be difficult and say, no, I'm not doing that. If they've said you have to do it, you have to do it. And also, if you see a health and safety issue, you are responsible for reporting that to your employer so that they can then do something about it.
You can't turn around and say, oh, I saw that 3 weeks ago,
Yeah,
that hole in the carpet, and someone's tripped over it now.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's sort of in an employed setting. What about as a self-employed person? Are you liable to the same legislation?
Well, in a kind of way, yes, really. So, first of all, if you're renting a treatment room off somebody, that's their responsibility to put it in place, but you have to follow it. But if you're self-employed and mobile, actually, it's probably even more important in a different way. But your hazards and your risks change. So you need to think about what your hazards might be if you're visiting someone's house. Obviously, risks of things going wrong are quite low, but you still need to think about it.
Okay, so this is sort of when both you and I are on the road at the moment, going freelance, self-employed, you're in someone's house, having a risk assessment for an inappropriate space potentially to massage. Is the environment sort of safe? All that kind of thing is relevant to look at. Are there trip hazards? Is there a safe fire exit? What's the nearest exit? Even those in someone's home are still relevant.
Oh, definitely. And there's some slightly broader things to think about as well. And I mean, the risk of this is low to nil, but it's something that has to be considered. You're walking into a stranger's house the first time you massage. So I have a protocol where I leave my husband with the client's name, address and telephone number, and the time I'm supposed to enter and the time I leave. I ring when I go in and I ring when I come out.
Yeah.
And I've got a safe word so that if something does go wrong and I've got a situation to ring him, I can ring him and use the safe word and he will call the police or whatever.
Yeah, which is really sensible because that is a risk that wouldn't be as relevant in a clinic setting because you're not going somewhere you don't know. So new clients is really, really important in that respect.
Also, if they've been referred and things like that, it's generally much safer.
Yeah.
But you do get random people phone you. If you've got a website, they will ring
Yeah.
you. And just because somebody's been referred doesn't mean they're safe. But obviously, there's a better chance of them being safe. So
it's managing the risk, isn't it?
Definitely.
So it's all as part of that health and safety policy. So the next one we need to talk about is probably the manual handling. So I guess there are some basic guidelines to follow. Does the load need to be moved? Can the load be reduced? What are the ways to minimise that risk? So is this about the therapist?
Yes and no. So first of all, it is about you as a therapist because you do need to move things around, both in a clinic, but also if you're visiting someone's house. I have a big bag full of towels. I have couch roll. I have a couch, which is an 18-kilo couch.
Yeah.
I have to lift that in and out of my car every day. And if it's raining, I can't put anything down. So I'm trying to do all of this and not put anything on the floor. So it's absolute headache sometimes.
Yeah.
The other benefit of knowing this is actually if somebody comes to you with an injury that's been caused from poor manual handling, first of all, you can give them a little bit of guidance. You have to be careful because you're not qualified to teach them this here. But you can give them a little bit of guidance and actually suggest they go back to their company and ask for the manual handling training. So there's things like that as well.
So again, that links into sort of like, the techniques as well to lift limbs. If you're lifting, so you've talked about sort of, although you can't offer training, you should yourself have a good understanding, right, of how to move somebody. So especially when you're lifting, if you've got to move someone's leg, for example, while you're treating, if that person's much bigger than you, that still requires manual handling as such.
Yeah.
So although you might not have had like specific training and awareness and sort of some protocols in place are really important from that point of view. You talked about as well sort of those different things for home visits. One thing I find really difficult is going up and down stairs.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
So I had a spiral staircase last week with a couch.
No.
It was about the worst thing I'd ever done trying to take. And unfortunately, my couch is a little bit lighter, but like you say, with a bag of towels, lotions, all the rest of it, it's a little bit different. So something that we need to be aware with, isn't it? And all the manual handling.
Definitely, and it might be with, if you're a more petite person. I mean, I'm quite a buffy person. I'm used to, and you with your horses, you're used to moving heavy stuff around. But actually, if you're not, don't be shy to say to people, "I'm sorry, it has to be ground level." Yeah,
not being afraid to say I can't treat in that area or whatever else. A lot of clients as well. This is a really sort of an aside in a way. They'll often offer to carry the couch in. Now, often their manual handling skills are a lot worse than ours. And therefore you could create a problem. So I tend to always insist that I do it. And I'm like, no, I've got towels one side, I'm couch the other, I'm balanced. But do be sort of quite firm in controlling your massage environment from that manual handling point of view as well. Be awful if you went in somewhere and ended up with an injury associated with the couch that you'd gone in to treat them on. Yeah,
it's definitely not good. And the other thing they'll do, and it really annoys me when I've got my brand new couch because I won't put the couch cover on because it adds weight to it. So I always carry my couch without it. It's when they bash it up the stairs. You just thunk, 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 and you just see it damaging the couch. So handle it yourself is always better.
So overall, what we've decided is we really do have to consider the manual handling, quite important. But I guess that sort of then leads us on to the next piece of legislation, which is first aid. Right. So the law requires a business to have the appropriate number of first aiders and the equipment, along with procedures in place for reporting issues.
Okay, I'll expand on that a little bit. So there isn't actually a set number of first aiders required in any business. You just have to decide what the appropriate number is. With a big business, you have to have a first aider at work, which is a more qualified first aider. Yeah. And then you can have like sub first aiders, which are your EFAW, which is emergency first aid at work. So the FAW is a 3-day qualification, and the EFAW is a 1-day qualification. As a sports massage therapist, because you're mobile and you're working on a loan basis, it's recommended that you actually do a qualification, but you only do need that EFAW, the 1-day course.
A lot of insurance companies will insist on it though as well, won't they? So in my insurance company, I know that they've said it's sort of compulsory to have some sort of first aid certificate, even basic, to be working and to be insured. So all links quite well. So it is important.
Definitely. And a lot of the governing bodies, if you decide to join one, will insist that you have one as well. So, but I think it's just safe to have it. And I've never used it, but I've had one for over 20 years. So better
Hopefully
safe
you
than
never
sorry.
will have to use it.
Definitely.
Okay, so that's probably the main legislations. But there are a whole load of other ones. So I think we'll just talk through a few and sort of discuss a couple of ideas. So the first one is the reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences regulation
Riddle.
from 2013. Yeah. So the information for this can be found on the HSE website. So, and if you're first aid trained, you will have covered this. But basically, if there's a death or a serious illness or injury that requires time off work, it needs to be reported.
Yes,
so that's
it
your
does.
responsibility.
Then you've got Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulation 1999. I love all these dates. This is the risk assessment process. So this is a process you have to follow. So everything has to be risk assessed.
Then you come into Employers' Liability. Now, this is Compulsory Insurance Act from 1969. So another older piece of legislation. But employers must have the appropriate insurance, and so must you.
Definitely. Don't ever neglect to have that one, because if something does go wrong, it's going to protect you in a lot of ways.
So next one we're looking at then is the Personal Protective Equipment at Work Regulation from 1992. Employers must provide any required equipment and employees must use it. You're your own employer here, so think about, particularly with COVID currently, face masks, sterilisation of equipment. How are you managing that and providing PPE for yourself, your clients, or employees if you're in a clinic?
So let's just expand on that in case people, these sorts of instances are going to come up occasionally. So at the moment, I've kind of changed my protocol. I'm asking my clients on mobile to provide their own towels, and where possible to wear a face mask. But obviously when they go face down, I don't insist on it because they're breathing downwards anyway. I wear a face mask and I can wear a visor if I want to. The other thing I'm doing is one-use lotion and hand wash and a hand towel. So I take it in a small plastic bag. I use my lotion and my hand wash and that towel in that place only, and then it goes into kind of the dirty bag in the car. I then sterilise the bottles and can reuse them, obviously wash the towels. So that's kind of what I've come up with.
So it's all managing and providing that sort of PPE. So that's all hopefully in line with that one.
Yeah.
So next one up is the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health from 2002.
Oh, gosh.
So in this, employers must be prepared and employees must follow training and instructions personally. Now this is not a big one for you to worry about, more for places that have a lot of chemicals. So then I think, Tamsin, you got some experience of this one directly, haven't you?
Yeah, I used to be the manager of a Sally's hair and beauty store, and we had to consider COSH then, because obviously we had things like peroxides, bleaches,
of course,
perm lotions, all that sort of stuff, and they're all quite nasty chemicals, especially if you mix a few of them together. So basically we had to have a COSH process and a COSH kit, and the basics of the COSH kit is cat litter, gloves, goggles and dustpan and brush. So basically you chuck the cat litter on it, leave it absorb the substance, brush it up with your glasses, goggles and gloves and apron on, and dispose of it appropriately according to COSH guidelines.
Seems perfectly sensible to me.
It does, doesn't it?
So after this, we're going to talk about the provision and use of work equipment, 1998. So employers must ensure safety and maintenance of equipment, and employees must report issues. Again, not a big one to consider, but think about your couch, checking it over regularly. If you're in a clinic, you should also just check the couch when you go in. If you haven't been in there for a few days or someone else has been using your room, check your own kit. You are responsible for that.
Also, if you've got a hydraulic couch or an electric couch, it actually does need regular services and maintenance. So that's something else to consider when buying a couch.
Certainly is. Right, workplace, health and safety and welfare regulations 1992. So employers must look after employees' welfare issues, workstations with heating, lighting and so on. Obviously, if you're renting a room, you must have your minimum requirements. But you would also need to think about this for yourself.
Well, yes, so you can bring in an additional heater. Obviously, for your clients, you can have blankets, fan if it's particularly hot, that sort of thing. So there's a few things you can do yourself, but it's about being sensible.
So not all of these legislations are going to be directly relevant to the self-employed mobile massage therapist, but do highlight key points to consider. If you're employed, you can see it's your responsibility as well as the employer's.
Definitely. So the key points here to look at after you're looking after your own welfare is health and safety when you're self-employed, and abide by the rules if you're employed. You don't need to know the regulations inside and out, but you need to be aware of them and you need to know where to go if you need more information.
Moving on from this, one that you really do need to take notice of is the Data Protection Act 1998.
Oh, definitely.
Now, you get a lot of information from your clients and you need to look after it and also not abuse it. The Data Protection Act provides guidelines for looking after and protecting that data.
Okay, shall we have a look at what best practice is? Right, so be specific why you need the information and how you're going to use it and store it with your client. So you obviously need this information because you need to figure out what the problem is and how best to treat it, and to make sure that there's no underlying problems.
So, all written documentation must be complete in blue or black ink. Pencil can be altered, so you're not allowed to use that, but that documentation must be complete within 24 hours. It's amazing how much you forget and how quickly, so straight away is much, much better.
What we try and do is allow a couple of minutes at the end of the client just to write some abbreviated notes. And they don't have to be an essay, do they? They just need to be something succinct but useful.
Yeah, and then that way your client can initial it or sign it, depending on whether you're online or working on a hard copy basis. So it's really important to then be clinical with your notes. No personal comments. The client can request to see their records at any time, and you may need to forward them to a third party, so a GP or another professional. So you don't really want your comments on someone's hair on there.
No, definitely not. You must sign every page and don't leave any gaps. Line through any areas that are going to be gappy, and dates are also really important.
Be as detailed as you can. Note down any aftercare or advice you give. Even advice over the phone should be recorded.
Definitely. So those texts, phone calls, oh yeah, slap some ice on it, actually needs to go down.
Once you've got that information, you're going to have to store it. And legally, it must be stored in a locked filing cabinet.
Preferably fireproof.
Yeah, ideally.
If your client is an adult, you must store those records for at least 8 years after the last treatment.
So it's quite a long time, really.
Yes.
But really important to do. If you treat a minor, however, records must be stored until their 25th birthday or 26th if they were 17 at the time. Now that could be decade or so worth of notes.
That's a lot of paper to keep hold of. If you keep electronic records, they need to be time and date stamped. Updates should also be time and date stamped, and they should also be password protected and safely stored.
That does not mean having them on your desktop on your laptop so that anyone can open up your laptop and have a look.
Yeah, not good.
So, there's further information on the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO website, about data protection. And if you're planning to store records electronically, I recommend you check the information first, as there are a few extra considerations you need to take into account.
It's really important to remember that you cannot send marketing information to your client unless they agree to it. Otherwise, your communications can only be based around their appointment. So if you need to cancel them or you're running late or responding to something. So basically, you can't encourage them to buy any other service. What I did do when I cancelled all my clients due to COVID, I sent them all a text saying, that I had to cancel them. But I stated in that I would drop them a text when I was back working so that they knew that I would actually be contacting them. And all I did was send a very basic text saying, I'm back working, I'll leave you to make an appointment when you're good and ready. I wasn't pushing, so I wasn't selling, I was just informing them I was back to work.
Yeah, so that is giving them the option to book a treatment, saying you are now available and giving them the option. So at which point they have the right to contact you or not. So you're not allowed to then pester them from that.
No, definitely not.
So final key thing to remember is that if you need to share their information with a third party, so that could be a GP, as we said, or a chiropractor, another treating party, you need to get your client to sign a consent form to release the information on their records. If someone requests information from you regarding a client, they must send a signed consent form from the person before you can release the information. And you must keep a copy of that. So it becomes quite complicated. Basically, sign everything and make sure it's all cross-referenced.
Definitely. So always keep your own copy of your consent form as well. And if you send your notes, don't send your original, send a photocopy.
Yes.
Okay, up next is working with children and vulnerable adults. And at some point in your massage career, you will probably end up working with one of these categories of people. In every case, you should have a chaperone. Chaperones are really useful because they can help you with explanations of things and obviously prevent any situations happening. Also ensure that assessment and treatment plans are explained carefully, not just to the chaperone, but to the child or the vulnerable adult as well. Remember, it's them that you're dealing with, so make sure you aim it at them and not the actual chaperone. And ensure you get consent or informed consent from both parties, so the chaperone and the child or the vulnerable adult.
So Tamsin mentioned about some of the benefits of having a chaperone. They're there to help explain things, but they'll also be really important of alleviating stress and tension. So often someone who doesn't really understand the process will be a little bit concerned about it, and that chaperone should be there to help do that, which is why you're explaining it to both parties. This is much more relevant with home visits, but I've certainly had experience of having a chaperone who wants to leave the room and disappear off and do other things. Now, once you've got the individual on the couch, be that the child or the vulnerable adult, I'm quite happy a lot of the time for the chaperone to do other things, be that read a book or continue cooking supper in the close vicinity. What I don't want is them disappearing out the house to pick up another kid, which has been asked in the past. So if people do that, by all means, don't be afraid to say absolutely not, you can't treat without them there. So you again have to just be in control of your treatment area.
And again, you have to remember you're not actually the babysitter.
Yeah.
So they're basically asking you to babysit while treat your child, and that's really not appropriate. Okay, so while we're on the topic, let's discuss informed consent a bit more, shall we? As you're aware, you need to get informed consent at every stage. So what exactly is it?
Well, the first word is a giveaway. It is to be informed, meaning you have clearly explained this to the client, what you plan to do and the information that you need. That then can give them all the information that they need in order to make a decision about whether they accept that treatment or not.
And also, they need to understand what's going on because it has to be a voluntary decision as well, doesn't it? You mustn't force or pressure them into it, and nor must a friend or family member either. So all of that seems like quite a lot of work, but if you choose to ignore this, what are the consequences?
Well, funnily enough, there are a few. You could be prosecuted, which may lead to your reputation, the business reputation, being damaged. You could have to pay fines, and you could lose clients, meaning you will lose income. Potentially, also potential loss of your business. And it really isn't a lot of work. It comes naturally after a while and doesn't take much time. A lot of it is just about being aware of everything in your surroundings.
Definitely, it can be difficult sometimes when you're pressed for time to do all of this, but actually it is key, isn't it?
It certainly is.
So all of this is best practice, and it is the most likely way of protecting both you and your client. So it's really, really important you try and always aim for the gold standard. So that is Unit 4, Section 1 completed.
It is.
You can now go on and do the short task at the end before moving on to Section 2. Bye.
Bye.